and welcome to Chess 101. My name is Melanie from Charlotte County Libraries and History, and today we will be talking about openings, middles, and endgames. Before we begin, there is a vast array of different ways to play the game of chess. If I were to list them all, this video would go on forever. In this video, I will introduce a few of the most popular styles of openings and some tips and terms about the middle and endgames. Remember, when choosing a strategy, you must decide how you want to play the game. For a more expansive list of strategies, check out the book, The Complete Book of Chess Strategy, Grandmaster Techniques from A to Z, by Jeremy Silman. Openings. What is an opening? There is no designated number of moves that make something an opening. It can be the first move or the first 20 moves. It means how you start your game, which pawns or pieces you move first. Most openings have names, unless you make one up yourself. 3 things you should do in an opening: center, develop, castle. First is center. Center means to aim your pawns and pieces at the center of the chessboard. The 4 center squares are d4, d5, e4, and e5, the highlighted squares in the middle of the board. Next, you want to develop. Develop means to bring your pieces out from the back rank. This does not include the king. This is an example from Jessica E. Martin's introductory chess book of a good development. She calls this the rainbow opening because of the arrangement of the pieces. This formation would probably not be able to be safely executed when your opponent's pieces are also moving towards the center. This is just a demonstration of what it means to develop your pieces. Pawns, knights, and bishops should be developed first. This gives you a chance to castle quickly. Which brings us to the third step, castling. The purpose of castling is to get your king to safety. All pieces but the king have stronger positions in the center. The king is never 100% safe, but in drawing it away from the center, you can protect it with a fortress of pawns, stand and guard. At the same time, castling can also help one of your rooks advance toward the center of the board. So what makes castling so cool? It is the only circumstance in which the king is allowed to move 2 squares and the rook can jump over another piece, namely the king. This is an example of king-side castling. Look at the difference between the before and after pictures. Notice that the king is able to move 2 spaces, and the rook is able to jump over the king, ending up in the ending position. This is an example of queenside castling. Note in the before and after how the kings and rooks move on both sides. Let's look at some of the best chess openers for beginners from chess.com. These include the Italian game, the Sicilian defense, the French defense, the Roy Lopez, and the Slav defense. Let's start by looking at the Italian game. The point is to control the center quickly with your pawn and knight, and then put your bishop on its most dangerous square. You are also preparing to castle to safety. Let's look through the moves of the Italian game opening. So the first move is your move of your pawn to e4. Your opponent retaliates by moving their pawn to e5. Your next move is moving your knight to f3. Your opponent retaliates by moving their knight to c6. And then you end with your third move of moving your bishop to c4. Next is the Sicilian defense. The Sicilian defense is the most popular choice of aggressive players with the black pieces. Often, white will play second move, knight to f3, and third move, pawn to d4, which will gain central space, but it allows black to benefit by exchanging a central pawn for a bishop's pawn. Let's look and see. So the first move of the Sicilian defense opening is moving your pawn to e4. The opponent then retaliates by moving their pawn to c5. The next moves sometimes differ, but usually follow the pattern mentioned here, where the second move is knight to f3, and then the third move is pawn to d4. The French defense. According to chess.com, this is one of the first strategic openings every chess player should learn. A risk of this opening is that the c8 bishop can be very hard to develop. Let's look at the initial moves. You start by moving your pawn to e4. Your opponent then moves their pawn to e6. Your second move is moving your next pawn to d4, in which your opponent moves their pawn to d5. Now let's look at the Ruy Lopez. The Ruy Lopez is one of the oldest and most classic of all openings. It is named after a Spanish bishop who wrote one of the first books of chess. The Ruy Lopez attacks the knight, which defends the e5 pawn. White hopes to use this attack to build more pressure on the black center. Let's look at the initial moves. Your first move is pawn to e4. Your opponent moves their pawn to e5. Your next move is knight to f3. Your opponent then moves their knight to c6. And you use your third move to move your bishop to position b5. Next, let's talk about the Slav defense. The Slav defense is a very solid opening which defends the d5 pawn securely. Black pieces can all develop to natural squares, but black will usually have a little less space. Let's look at the initial moves. The first move of the Slav defense is to move your pawn to d4. Your opponent will then move their pawn to d5. For your second move, you move your pawn to c4, and your opponent moves theirs to c6. Now that we looked at some of the beginner openings, let's talk about what to do in the middle of the game. So what do you do in the middle of the game? First and foremost, you want to attack. The most important thing at this point of your chess career is to make sure you use all of your pieces, not lose all your pieces. Look ahead and ask yourself, if I place my piece here, will it be hanging or protected? What does it mean if a piece is hanging? If a piece is hanging, no one is guarding it, and it can be captured for free without being captured back. What does it mean if a piece is protected? Protected is the opposite of hanging. If you capture it, you will get captured back. You will need freedom. Instead of cramping up your pieces, which is more defensive, try to bring them out toward the middle. You can remember this by thinking middle of the game, middle of the board. Go for an attack somewhere on the board. Ask yourself which piece is not active or participating in the game and doing a job, and try to get it to a better square. Let's look at an example of a piece not being active. Can you tell which piece on this board is not being active? The white rook. Where can we move the white rook so that it has an active role on the board? The best move to engage your white rook would be moving it to d1. This opens up the board for the rook, allowing it to move more freely around. Now let's talk about the endgame. How do you know that you're in the endgame? The key element of the endgame is that most of the pieces are gone. If the queens have been traded off the board, your goal is to promote. From here, you want to force a checkmate. Watch my Chess 101 Check, Checkmate, and Draws video from last month to learn about how to finish your game. If you want to learn more about chess, check out these books I used for yourself from your local library. Another fantastic resource is chess.com. It has daily puzzles, lessons, articles, videos, and so much more. You can even practice playing on your own, against a computer, or in tournaments. Let's end with a quote. Play the opening like a book, the middle game like a magician, and the end game like a machine. Rudolf Spielmann. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.